Good morning, people. Beautiful springtime morning here on the river. Everything feels just completely pregnant with the seed burst moment of change, and I'm ready for it. It feels good. Lots to discuss today. We'll go through it kind of in sequence, and I'll try to make it somewhat coherent. But this is basically the 1 year anniversary of the choice to resurrect my little channel here after it got hacked and all of the well, not only the subscribers but the content wiped out. Some of you have come back and we have some new faces, and thank you for all of that. Obviously, in response to that, I've kind of changed the trajectory of the sorts of things that I wanted to talk about, because I don't need to stick my neck out quite that far. But anyway, there's a lot going on in my life in the world, and let's talk some navigation. So remember, here a year ago, we were kind of finishing up a discussion, practically a year long, about how the emergence of a final conflict due to resource scarcity and environmental degradation, how this final conflict between major powers would be inevitable and in fact necessary, because simply put, there are not enough resources left on planet Earth, resources including the ability to dispose of waste without consequence. That is a resource, in fact. There is not enough resource left to support, well, three major powers, let alone more. In fact, there's really not enough to support even one major power at any kind of standard of living such as we are accustomed to enjoying. This was a mathematical certainty, and it was certainly obvious and is known to any of the individuals out there who actually have the agency by which to act, that there would come a final day in which one would need to project power in order to maintain control over access to the resources necessary to keep one's culture, country, slash civilization intact. Obviously, that fight has been picked between the West and Russia, and it has become commonplace even in the corporate media to discuss openly that a confrontation between the U.S. and China will be necessary in the near term. Necessary in the near term. Or the ability and the opportunity to maintain power in the West against a rising China, that opportunity will be forever lost. And now a large-scale confrontation between the U.S. and China is becoming completely normalized in media discussions. This is astonishing. Astonishing. The House, I guess, in the U.S. voted unanimously to declassify what is known about the origins of the plague. It'll be interesting to see how provocative the release of this information actually can be in justifying further aggression towards China. I don't see the timing of this being any kind of accident. Needless to say, we discussed in great deal what I like to call the bottleneck moment of that inevitable confluence of conflict necessary as the final great players decide who ends up running the show. And we are here now. We are here now. And the consequences are conspicuous and will become more and more present in all of our lives as we go forward. So it was earlier this year, I don't know, early January, I guess it is, where the girl and I decided that we'd take kind of an impromptu trip on the boat. And so we did, and kind of blew out of here unprepared over to the Gulf Islands, just kind of on a whim. We were out just taking a trip on the river for fun, doing a little sightseeing, and the weather seemed nice enough, and so we just made the choice to go. And it was rather interesting because headed over to one of my favorite islands. I was low on diesel, but I figured I would just fill up over there, and I didn't really have groceries on board that were to my liking, but I'd figure I'd go to the store and take care of that once I was there. And you do, and he had a kind of a nice sail. It was a bit of a thrash and kind of boisterous, and she was a touch sick from it, but mighty. Anyway, we get over there, and it's cold as hell and all the rest, but no matter on the boat. And come to find out that the gas station there is only open 2 days a week. There was a marina a couple miles to the north, but it's in foreclosure and bankruptcy now, so like their fuel dock is open 1 day a week. And like it was going to be most of the week before I could actually get diesel, even run the diesel furnace. And of course, you take a look around it as to why, and it seems of the inhabitants that the average age, and I mean average age, must be 80, right? And there's very little going on. And the only kinds of individuals that you encounter are people that seem to have magical incomes from either generational wealth and shenanigans of years gone by, or perhaps their own kids. It just came across like a ghost town. Now, I mean, a lot of these communities were hit very hard during the pandemic and all, because, of course, traffic and such was down. But I had hoped that some of this had recovered to some degree. But in fact, the cost of doing business across the board has become, especially over the last year, especially on the heels of recovery from the pandemic, it has simply become not profitable for a lot of businesses that were just kind of hanging on the edge, and they have gone away. And in these communities that were kind of on the fringe anyway, and were able to kind of get along because, I don't know, their costs were somewhat localized and they could kind of hang on, like things are becoming surprisingly scarce and surprisingly iffy in terms of whether or not they will even be there as a service to you at all. It was rather remarkable and interesting. I mean, it wasn't any problem. I just decided that I would hang out for a kind of couple of days. I had enough diesel to basically run the furnace, and I figured I'd just wait for the fuel dock to open up and buy when I needed to get back home. Girl went home on the ferry. The weather out there was just blowing stink, and I didn't want to put her through it. Anyhow, very interesting, and just indications of what's emerging. And so I did. I bought 20 gallons of diesel for the trip home and up the river, and it cost me $200. So in my own neck of the woods, the one of the major companies that has been here since the early 70s, a small builder of power boats, between 25 and 30 feet. I think I've built 10 of their boats now. and certainly restored a whole gaggle of others. I don't even have any idea how many over the last 6 years. They're closing their doors by 1st of June. They simply cannot um, pay the rent, basically. The cost of the shop space and such has become so high that they just cannot generate the revenue to maintain productivity enough to support the per square foot cost of the shop space they've had for 30 years. So they're done. I've built my last of those boats. I mean, it's no problem for me. I think it took 2 hours to find some place to replace them, and so I'm scheduled with lots of projects for the fall. But it's just indicative again of change. There's another aspect of this. When I first started them, we must have had 3 boats on the go, on the build, on the shop floor, and they probably had a crew of 12. And now we have a ghost ship of 4. I'm sure they hadn't got a contract to build a boat in over a year. Again, the kinds of people that are foolish enough to buy small power boats are all people who probably have the average age of 75, and there are just fewer of those every day. I built one last summer, and the guy had it for 35 days before he had a major health issue, and it went back on the market. I don't believe the boat has sold yet. Demographics, consequences, reality. Again, these guys too are going to be in a position, even if they can afford basically a $300,000 fishing boat, they're going to be in a situation with their chosen choice of power, typically a 300 horsepower Yamaha or Mercury motor, rated that burns 110 liters an hour at $2 a liter for gasoline off the fuel dock. I mean, that makes for some pretty expensive salmon. And the available pool of fools that would even choose to do something like that grows smaller by the day. So it's no surprise that there would be less demand going forward. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. But again, for my own welfare and such, this isn't problematic. My skills are in high demand, so I'm not concerned about that at all. No concerns there. But the industry as a whole is changing just radically and quickly, and as a response to real circumstances in reality that are driving changes in consumer expectations and the entire market. Like, this is just the way it is. And completely foreseeable, but few choose to foresee. So that's kind of exciting for me, in fact, because once I finally get my last couple of projects tied up with these guys, I'm going to take much of the summer off, if not all of it, and start work again in the fall, which will be quite the luxury. And I hope to be able to get the boat up north and pound the halibut a little bit, and all that sort of thing. And I'm very excited about that. The boat's in good shape and really ready to go do things. My dad, I mean, you may have known if you followed the channel, we lost Mom here last summer. He's been very much searching around looking for a future. But I'm going to aid him in immigrating to Canada. I have got him his new boat. His boat is in a slip right adjacent to my own, and I'm going to be spending some time on the water with him, getting him started. He is 74 years old and in quite good health and fit and able, and eager to try something else. And that's what's going to be happening there. So that's good. And of course, The girl, too, she's eager to spend some time in the water. She's very much taken to things, and she's being very diligent about learning the necessary skills, which I admire a great deal. So I imagine I'll be away from the dock quite a little bit, and that's great because I'm rather burnt out uh, building these silly boats for dinosaurs. Like, there can come a point where you know change is happening, that it just can become oppressive. It can become oppressive waiting for it to happen. There's an image in the I Ching that suggests precisely the same. It's the tension that you feel as the thunderclouds um, gather, and it's the anticipation of the lightning bolts and the rain and the hail. As you wait for that, there can be a tremendous amount of relief, in fact, if you know it's coming, to finally have it happen. And I've been anticipating this moment for some time, and in fact, there is real relief in um, seeing it now unfold. Now, over the last year, in order to keep the conversation around here relatively meta and discuss kind of between the lines why it is that we are facing across the board, all scales, all sectors, exactly what we're facing. We've discussed in great deal the idea that I credit mostly to Martin Buber, but certainly many, many others throughout history, and most indigenous cultures see things identically. We've investigated in great deal the dichotomy, in fact, the divide between the two essential postures that one might adopt in relating to other, the external other in the world, and using the language of Buber, we call that the one posture, the I-it, where the self sees it, to use the Kantian terminology perhaps, as a mere means to an end. The I-it posture is essentially exploitive. At its very best, it can merely be transactional, perhaps fair, at its best. But the alternative is the I-thou, which sees other as, at the very least, kin. At probably the highest level of understanding, it sees other as another manifestation of a collective self. It understands that while there's an innate drive within any living organism to reach towards creativity, prosperity, and even abundance, that must be done through the mechanism of elevating the all, not creating scarcity elsewhere as a means to enrich oneself in the short term, destroying precisely that which provides one life. I-it and I-thou. Most persistent cultures have throughout history, if you look at, again, the examples that I like to bring up because I know them better, perhaps the coast tribes on my coast, some of the most persistent cultures in the world, demonstrating 20,000 years of habitation in their biome without meaningful ecological destruction, relatively sophisticated artistry, music, culture. They were able to do so because they understood this. They lived within their biome as a co-participant in the creative process, and they did very well by it. Our culture, on the other hand, doesn't do that. We outsource our scarcity through violence to other people. It allows us to maintain an image, at least if we are myopic and live within uh, the protective walls of empire, the idea that we are somehow prosperous as we deplete the all. But again, this is the bottleneck moment. It is, in essence, a Ponzi scheme, in fact, where you must have sufficient inputs at the base that are extorted from people who are less powerful around the world to support the entire pyramid that appears like prosperity. But again, we're getting to the moment in which those essential core inputs are becoming unavailable. And things can fold up shop pretty quick. We had our first major bank run in the US here Friday. This is yet again exactly the phenomenon that we are discussing here. I, it, I, thou. I see at the core the most fundamental problem facing humanity at this moment, contained in understanding this divide between I, it, and I, thou. It is essential that we come to understand that systems that exploit the commons, cultures that eat their seed corn, have made a choice to become extinct. If you don't want to have a death pact, if you want to have persistent, durable relating and life that has a indefinite prospects for survival, there is really only one way to do that, and that is to understand that you as an organism must be involved to support that which gives you life. It's astonishing that that's a radical notion, but it's only radical because our culture has become so radicalized in the opposite. It's a concept that many people simply cannot even comprehend, let alone put into action. It's made me very happy over the last year how some of you have taken to this idea very easily and, in fact, have embraced it. That's great. That is great. Culture that. This is the most important perspective that you can have going into the future. Because certainly, even in face of difficulty, living in a manner that is I, thou, will at least personally give you tremendous opportunity towards quality of life and meaning and purpose, as well as understanding the I-it dynamic will allow you to understand and predict and anticipate what happens in the larger world and people that you might know who are insensible to the difference between those postures. So if you've come to embrace that I, thou living, good for you. You have done very well to provide yourself with something tremendously precious. And I would also say that becoming aware of the dichotomy between I, it, and I, thou, as Buber describes it, but I mean, I think it would be just as appropriate to describe this dichotomy in other terms. I mean, they could be almost expressed as principles of thermodynamics if you wanted. pretty basic stuff. If you eat, but however you want to phrase it or think about it, it is clear that I-it exploitative relating has run its course, and it is out of the fundamental inputs necessary to support its destructive habits. And as far as I'm concerned, whether or not, and there are many of them, experts who are setting themselves up either discussing the perennial topic of how difficult it is to relate to other people, or how difficult it is to operate in the business environment, or how difficult it is for habitat or ecology, or within the realm of finance, or within resource scarcity, or any of the other talking heads out there that claim some expertise in the issue, any of these issues, which are all correlated. They are all engendered by I-it relating. This is why we have a crisis. All of them. It's essential that any of the experts slash quote unquote out there who are offering up advice in terms of some way of personally navigating these issues, at all of them at all scale, if they are not conversant, explicitly so, in the understanding that you must be a co-participant in supporting that which gives you life, if they don't understand this and they don't conspicuously embrace this principle in their own life, and they don't live conspicuously different, they don't understand the issue. And their strategies, whether they are about how to deal with, I don't know, your intimate partner relationships, or how to deal with the wealth of nations, okay, regardless of what it is, if they don't understand that you must support the system that makes your activity as a free agent within it possible, if you don't do that, you have elected to break the cycle, and your persistence is limited. If they don't understand this as a basic fundamental first principle in all relating with all external others, if they don't understand this, even their well-meaning, even thoughtful advice is doomed. It must come through the filter. It must come through the filter. It must come through the filter if it's going to be successful. Of elevating the self by elevating the whole. All relationships and at all scales. Everything else is a suicide pact. I recommend you don't participate. Now, for most of us, this will be a process once we understand the concept abstractly, and deconditioning ourselves from our societal expectations, prejudices, and the rest is a necessary aspect of this process. It's not going to be easy. I doubt any of us will complete it fully within our lifespans, and I certainly have not either. It's just that it has become a guiding principle and a objective reality that I consider in most of my decisions daily, as best as I am able. I mean, you can phrase this a lot of ways. You could call it I, it, I, thou. You could also say don't shit in your bed. Like, this is not complicated stuff. But once you make it a a first principle in your own choices, things start to look different. I am one of the things that has been hard for me to learn because I've been relatively lucky in my life, um, being kind of a quick study and generally handy, and having come from family that was generally able and independent and handy, um, was a certain kind of egotistic unawareness of the privilege of being a kind of can-do sort of person. One of the things that has taken me a while to learn, and this is a critical aspect towards understanding mentorship, is that there are many, many, many people out there who would love to live their lives differently, and in fact can understand precisely what we're getting at here, talking about I, it, and I, thou. It's just that they lack not information, they lack not information but examples. The average individual learns through not information but emulation. There's plenty of talk out there, and there's plenty of advice, but there's very little in terms of actionable examples, real mentorship, where um, individuals can see something firsthand, can see peers, relatable peers, choosing to live life differently. That's very rare out there. And sure, I mean, I know um, there's a zillion channels out there on YouTube and all the rest of, you know, especially with gratuitous, bikini shots and some Hollywood glam and all the rest of this stuff. I mean, there's a ton of that out there. Yeah, so like I'm not unaware that there are plenty of people out there giving you some how to, but it's also very obvious in most of these cases that the how to is heavily laced by self promotion and being on the make. Um, Mentorship is different. It's more person to person. It's more intimate. Um, it's more between peers. Um, that sort of thing is much more what I would aspire towards and that I find necessary. Um, I feel that we've discussed the I it, I thou divide pretty effectively, and most of you, I think, have, if you were willing, at least at the abstract level, come to understand its importance. Because I have the opportunity over maybe the next 6 months to move the conversation into um, that which is more practical. Um, I'm going to try to make a real attempt um, to show what it might look like to practically move into a lifestyle where you are trying with all of your relationships, interpersonal or with civilization or with life itself, internally and externally, what it looks like to try to make I thou relating a fundamental first principle. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of just practical stuff, from perhaps changing oil in the Isuzu inboard, to not tying to provisioning the boat, to going fishing, to all the rest of these things. The stuff that we all have to do. But to try to um, do that while walking the proverbial uh, red road, I guess, using the parlance of North American indigenous cultures, making the attempt as much as possible to navigate that while having respect for the system that supports my life. How do you do that in the day-to-day? I'm going to try to kind of pull that off. And I'm hoping that that will be helpful, and I will try to keep it as honest and practical and as little glamorous as it might need to be. Because, um, again, individuals learn through emulation. Knowledge can only take you so far. Certainly, my way is not the only way, but it's a good way. Um, I'm certainly interested in hearing how um, others might take it on. But again, back to the same thing like we've been discussing all year. Um, I like to frame the expression of I thou relating really in these terms as a dialogue with life, being cognizant of the Greek there, the dia and the logos, the I thou relating with life being that which expresses the dia, the between, and the logos, which is the inherent intent, drives the life process that exists within other to face life and one's relationship with life or other people or the natural world as a dialogue respecting the dia logos. I've come to kind of personally call it, in fact, the dia logos lifestyle, the dialogue of living. Anyway, as much as possible, kind of trying to demonstrate how that idea has evolved for me is what I'd like to try to do. And if I can do that successfully, I'd be very happy. And we'll see what we can do. As always, I very much appreciate the support that we get around here. I know we're small in number. That isn't too surprising, but growing. And I certainly support and appreciate the feedback, and I love to hear of the efforts that the rest of you are making towards embracing the same. It's the most important thing we could possibly do in this world, so let's take it on seriously. Anyway, a little bit of reflection and a long ramble early in the spring on the birthday of the channel's resurrection here. Covered a lot of ground. Thanks for listening if you stuck in, and look forward to new projects. Cheers, people.